So we are in week 3 of our sermon series, If Then, where we are looking at the nature of our relationship with God. And it's important to talk about the nature of our relationship with God and to dig into that because the nature of our relationship with God drives a lot of things. First of all, if we believe that God is one thing, then that drives our actions in a very considerable way. If we think God is a certain way, then it drives our actions in a certain direction. And our actions determine a lot about us. They determine who we will become from this point forward. Because our actions become our habits become our character, and our character ultimately becomes who we are. So how we think about God drives a lot of our actions, which determines who we are. And who we are and how we act determines a lot about what happens in the world. So it's important that we get this right. In week 1, we looked at Isaiah chapter 58. Now, there are 3 or 4 kind of like epic names in the Bible, right? For us in our faith tradition, Jesus is certainly at the top. Then we have Moses and we have Isaiah. Like, people can debate about others, but those are certainly the top 3 that most people would consider in the Bible. So we are focusing on Isaiah, we're focusing on things from Moses, and we're going to be focusing on things from Jesus on this. And in Isaiah 58, we saw a situation where the people were in real pain. The nation of Israel was in real pain and difficulty. But the challenge was, while they were going through the motions of some ritual actions that can be good on their face, good practices like fasting and going to worship and covering themselves and saying, we are repenting. All that stuff can be really good. The problem was they were going through the motions and saying, take care of me, take care of me, take care of me. And God was telling the people, that's not what I need. And we saw that Isaiah clearly said, because it kept going, if then, that if you do it this way, I'm not going to be happy. That if you do this and your focus is on yourself, looking in the mirror, if you're primarily focused on yourself, this isn't going to go well. You're not going to be able to hear me. You're not going to be able to feel my presence. I'm going to always love you, but I'm not going to always be able to be with you. Not because I'm not trying, but because you've put up a barrier around me and you're incapable of hearing me, so I can't be with you in the same way that you need. But if you focus on other people primarily, if you take care of the oppressed, if you take care of the hungry, if you take care of the naked, then you will see me. And I will be able to hear you, and I will be with you, and I will be in front of you, and the spirit that is inside of you will burst forth, and I will be behind you and surround you, and amazing things will be able to happen. But it is up to you. If you do this, then this is what happens. If you do that, then this is what happens. And then the following week, last week, in the sermon series, If God Had Dinosaur Arms, right? We talked about how people sometimes act like God is the one not making enough effort. And that sometimes we're pretending like we're the ones doing all the stretching and all the work, and God's like, here, just come a little closer, and then maybe I'll be able to help you here. My short little arms are not going to be able to help you. Right? And that God is looking for us to act and to take the step that if we work to help the people, again, building on 58, if we work to help people, then God will be able to trigger certain things that are otherwise unavailable to us. And in that particular passage, it was specifically about the legal system and the justice system. Because the legal system, going after the legal system and the justice system was one of the worst offenses you could do. Because that was the last line of defense between the powerful people and the people who were oppressed. And once you went after the legal system and tried to attack the legal system, then there was nothing left to prevent the powerful from just continuing to dominate the oppressed. And God said, I already know that the people who are trying to break this system are a problem, but the bigger problem is that all of you who don't like this aren't doing anything. And if you do something, I will be there to make change. But if not, I'm not going to let it stand. I'm going to come down. And if you go to God, if God has to do this, if God, which we represent as light in this sermon series, if God has to fix it, then we failed. Right? If we don't do the work and let God magnify that work, then we have failed. Someone in this community of faith was here the other day and summarized this whole sermon with one line in a t-shirt. It said, "Don't make me come down there, God." Right? Don't make me come down there. Some people want God to come down and fix everything. I promise you, not just because of me, because what it said right after that passage that we were looking at, if God has to come down here because not a single person is willing to do this, it is not going to go well for us. It is not going to go well for earth. It is not going to go well for us. And so we said we individually and as a community of faith need to be that place that God never says there's nobody. That God never says there's no community of faith and no individual who is willing to do this work, so that we make sure that if nobody else does it, that we will. So now we are in week 3, and we're going to go into some fun territory here because we're going into Deuteronomy. And the words "fun" and Deuteronomy are rarely related, but this I think we're going to have some fun with this one. So we're going to Deuteronomy chapter 30, starting with verse 15. And it says, "See," and this is Moses talking, right? Moses is the dominant character in Deuteronomy and the dominant character once we start Exodus for the final 4 books of the first 5 books, known as the Pentateuch, also the Torah. "See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. If," there's that same thing again, "if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I am commanding you today, by loving the Lord your God, walking in God's ways, and observing God's commandments, decrees, and ordinances, then you shall live and become numerous, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess." What's going on here is, this is Moses, right? We got the 2 tablets from the 10 Commandments. This is the representation of Moses today, and this is towards the end of Deuteronomy. Moses, right after this, Moses is going to pass on the leadership of the people of Israel to Joshua. And shortly after that, Moses dies. This is Moses' closing argument to the people of Israel. This is stuff that Moses has said before, early on in Exodus, throughout Deuteronomy, and said, "I need you, this is the last thing I'm going to tell you." And Moses, you can't exaggerate the impact of Moses in our faith tradition and Judaism. Like, you cannot, it is impossible to exaggerate the importance of Moses and the importance of the figure of Moses. And so everybody's paying attention to every single word he's saying, and he's like, "This is it. I've told you before, I'm going to tell you again, pay attention to this. If you do this, then you're going to have life." And everybody's like, "Yay! That sounds fantastic. Yay! If you do this, then you'll have life." And then he keeps going, and people are like, "Oh no, he's going to keep going." Right? And so he goes, "But," right? But, one of those huge power words to pay attention to. Whenever that word "but" and "then" comes up. "But if your heart turns away, and you do not hear, but are led astray and bow down to other gods," and back then there were literal other gods that they were considering. Literal other gods that they're considering. But today, there are all kinds of other gods that we can think of that we may turn to instead of the God that we say we are going to follow and worship. "That if you do that and you bow down to them, then I declare to you today that you shall perish." And all the people were like, "Yeah," or all of a sudden like, "Yikes." But Moses could not be more clear, because this is not the only time that Moses says it. If you do this, then you will have life. If you don't do it, you're going to die. And I'm not talking about like literal fall down, God striking you down, but you will be walking dead in this world. That you will have a life of death. That you will not have the life that you are offered to have, and it will not be the one that you hope to have or that you have the potential to have, which will exceed any expectation that you could possibly have. So, but there are some potential pitfalls when we look at certain scriptures, particularly this kind of scripture, some potential pitfalls, and one of them has to do with knowing who people are talking to and where you are in the text. Moses was not talking to you personally. Right? One of the problems we have sometimes is we assume that this was written today and that Moses or the person was talking to us personally. Moses was talking to the 12 tribes of Israel. Moses was talking to a nation, and that is an important context. Now, Moses has told the nation all of these things before, and he is summing up everything that is important for them to know. But our individual selves are like, well, what about me? What about me? Does this apply to me individually too? Yes, it does. Only it's better to know who Moses is talking to before you think it's just directed at you. There are very valuable things to take out of this for our own personal direction. If we follow the commandments and the ways and follow the way, things will go well for us, better for us than they would have otherwise. If we follow these things, things will go better than they would have gone. And if we don't do this, things will go worse than they would have gone. But here is the danger in this. It does not mean if you do these things that nothing bad is going to happen to you. Cancer is going to happen to you regardless of whether you follow these directives or not. If it's going to happen. Something bad may happen to you regardless of whether you follow this or not. The danger in this statement is some people make it sound like if you got sick, it meant you weren't faithful enough. If something bad happens to you, it meant you didn't follow these commandments enough. Hogwash. What it means is whatever path you end up on, whatever happens to you in your life, you will be better off following this. If something tragic happens to you, you are better off in the community of faith and following these guidelines and these ordinances and these commandments. If you are doing something and things are wonderful going on in your life, but you are not following these, you will not be the person and have the life that you are offered to have. And there are some other pitfalls with this kind of passage as well, because people, particularly in Christianity, have a couple of the following attitudes. Oh my gosh, following all these commands, following these things and doing this, my gosh, it's so hard. It's too hard. I can't possibly do all of this. And God's like, no, it's not. Well, why are you saying that, Pastor John? Well, one of the things we say in the context of a scripture, we already talked about what happens after. This is Moses' closing argument. He's about to hand off the leadership. He's about to die. He's got no motivation other than to saying exactly what he thinks they need to hear. Right before this passage, this is what God says through Moses. Surely this commandment that I am commanding you today is not too hard for you. It's not way up in heaven. You don't have to die to go figure it out. It's not so far to the edges of the sea, and the sea was considered the most dangerous place you could go. So it was saying you would not be able to go across the sea to find it. So you don't have to do it. It's in your mouth, and it's in your heart. Surely these things are not too hard for you. As a matter of fact, once you start doing it, it gets easier and easier and easier and easier, and reinforcing of the good things that you can do and can happen in your life. And here's the other one. Well, okay, well, there's that kind of stuff, but Jesus changed that. I don't have to do that anymore because all I have to do is say, yay, Jesus. All I have to do is say, you are in my heart, and I confess that I am a sinner, and I am putting my trust in you, and so everything that I did before is forgiven, and everything I do in the future is forgiven, and that's all I have to do. Not so. People say, but Jesus changed all that. It's like, Jesus is like, that's news to me. That's news to me, I did. So let's take a look at a couple passages here from Jesus, just so you don't take my word for it, because just like any other faith leader that you shouldn't put complete 100% trust in to listen to everything, you shouldn't do that with me either. Listen to it, take it, check it, the whole thing, so we can look at this stuff. But right here in John from the reading earlier today, if you love me, you will follow my commandments. If you're not following my commandments, you're showing you don't love me. You want to know how I know whether you love me or not? You're following my commandments. A little later, in case you think that he just said it one time, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. That's how you know you are keeping in and abiding in his love, is by keeping his commandments. Now you might say, well, those are Jesus' commandments. He gave different commandments. All right, fair enough. He did give a couple additional commandments, like love each other as I loved you. But in addition to that, if we go back to Matthew chapter 19, Jesus says, if you wish to enter into life, if you want life then, right, just like we heard from Moses, if you wish to enter life, keep the commandments. He hasn't given any new commandments yet. And the commandments he's about to refer to most of the 10 commandments. So Jesus is not turning all of this stuff over, and it is not too hard. We just may choose not to do it. It is a choice whether we are going to do this or not, and it is a clear choice. If we follow the way of God, then we get life. But sometimes this is how we act. And right here, this represents the way, right? Otherwise known as the narrow way, right? The narrow way. So we've got people along on the narrow way, but sometimes we act like this person right here is like, here's the wide highway of the world, right? You have the narrow way and then the wide highway of the world. And they're going in different directions because they always, always, always do. So you have a choice about which one do you want to be on. But sometimes we don't want to, just like, I don't really want to choose. I want to have both things, right? But it's not like picking on the menu that you're like, you know what? I'm going to have the surf and turf because I can't decide between one thing and the other, right? You've got to choose between one path or the other, but sometimes we try to hedge that. And we're walking along this path, and we're kind of like holding on to the narrow way. Like, I'm touching you, God. I'm doing these rituals. I'm praying, and I'm coming to church on Sunday, and I'm doing this, and I'm fasting, and I'm trying different things, and I give money, and I try to do good things, and I try, but I'm still holding, but I'm really going to continue with my life this way. And you can do that for a little while. But as that path of the world continues to diverge, and all of a sudden you're like holding on with the one arm and you're sweating and like, I'm going to keep trying. And eventually you cannot do it, and the world takes you away, and you cannot any longer go on both paths at the same time. This simply is not possible to do. It is not possible to do. And we don't like to be told that we have to make a choice. That's not our style as people in America. It's not our style as independent Connecticut Yankees and that kind of thing. But we need to make a choice between one way or the other, because constantly in the Hebrew Bible, in the New Testament, from Jesus to Moses to Isaiah to other people, then there's a conditional and we have to make a choice. And once you choose one way, if you choose God, you cannot continue on the other way and still be choosing God. If you choose the other way, you are no longer choosing God. You can't have it both ways. And if you're like holding on like this and trying to do all this kind of stuff, it does not work, and it does not go well. And if that's the nature of the relationship with God, that we're trying to compromise and not actually choose and follow God and try to do this whole thing with the world and then kind of holding on right there, it leads to a kind of living death. When things are difficult, you get that just, I don't know what I'm going to do feeling. I don't know what to do. How am I going to engage? How am I going to change something in the world? But how does this impact us as a community of faith? How does this impact us? Moses was talking to a nation. Moses was talking to a nation. So how does that impact? How about the environment? How about the environment? If we take care of the environment as a nation, things will prosper and flourish and go well for us as a nation, as the land that we are in, as humanity, as the planet, as the country, whichever one. If we do not, what happens? Serious question. What happens if we continue on this path of not taking care of God's creation? We die. We die. So this isn't just theoretical stuff in Deuteronomy. This isn't just theoretical stuff from God. This isn't just theoretical stuff from Moses. This is real stuff. As a country, if we do not move in a certain direction, we will die. If we move in another direction, we can thrive and flourish in the land and the planet that we have been given. And where's another place? Another place is in how you and how we vote. I'm never going to tell you how to vote, but how you choose to vote can determine whether we go down a path that is consistent with the one that is taking care of the poor, taking care of the oppressed, taking care of the immigrant, taking care of those people where the justice system has everybody and the people under attack or we can choose a way that is trying to move us in a different direction, and you can't have it both ways. You cannot say you are following God and hurt all the people that God says you're supposed to protect. You cannot do that. That is trying to walk the way of the world and pretend you're on the narrow way. You cannot do it. You cannot say and be on the path of the narrow way and be worshiping God and vote against the interests of all of the people that God says that we are supposed to protect. This impacts us individually in our personal actions, but also on a scale as the nation, which is why Moses was talking to us in that way as a nation, and why Jesus is saying, no, you cannot make all of that stuff about what really following God is go away. So how far do we have to be in as people once we choose that way to have all this happen? If you come next week, then you can find out the answer to that one as we have, if you are all in. Amen.